I'm moving in with my parents if you object. We're getting a divorce out of nowhere. My husband Bob casually dropped the bomb. What do you mean by that? It's just as I said. I'm going to use that $3 million as I see fit. I've decided to build a duplex with that money. That's all there is to it. He continued with an air of nonchalance. I was dumbfounded that Bob was so casually discussing spending the $3 million I inherited from my mother's estate. Construction will start next month, and once it's done, we're moving. Prepare accordingly. In the meantime, I'm going to invite my parents over, so you better take good care of them. If you object, we're getting a divorce. Remember, I'm the head of this household, which means I'm the boss. I'll say it again, if you can't follow my lead, we're getting a divorce, he asserted. I stared at Bob, trying to gauge if he was in his right mind. All right, but you're going to regret this, I managed to utter. Shut up, you worthless wife, Bob retorted confidently, probably assuming I'd cave as usual. He walked out the front door. Of course, I didn't follow him. 3 days later, my name is Catherine. I'm 40, working as a freelance writer. I met Bob at work when I was still employed at a publishing company in New York. Back then, I was 27, and Bob was 29. We quickly became serious and decided to live together, getting officially registered about 6 months later. We had children right away, and life was pretty rhythmic and harmonious. Currently, we're renting a place, but once the kids grow up a bit more, we plan to build a house. I was satisfied with our life, but sometimes misfortune strikes when least expected. My mother was suddenly diagnosed with an incurable illness, so advanced that the only thing left to do was to make sure she was comfortable. When I say satisfied with life, I'm talking about my immediate family, my husband, and children. But when it comes to parents, it's a different story. My dad passed away when I was in high school due to illness. Thankfully, we owned our house, and with my father's insurance, the mortgage was paid off. My mom had a job, so we weren't financially struggling. However, with no grandparents or reliable relatives to turn to, and being the only child, I knew my mom must have felt lonely and faced hardships. Despite all this, I was fortunate not to struggle financially. I even went to college and, after getting a job, contributed a bit to the household. I was able to focus on my passion without many constraints. When I got married, I moved out of my childhood home. My in-laws weren't too thrilled about us living in the area where I grew up. They've been farmers for generations and are still active in their 60s. I admire their work ethic, but they have outdated views, especially regarding gender roles. Bob moved to New York for college, and after graduating, he got a job there, where he met and married me. His parents didn't like this. Quit your job and help us out on the farm, Catherine, his dad would say even before we got married. I have my job too, so I can't move back. And what would I do there anyway? There's no work for me in Nebraska. Bob said that and managed to persuade my in-laws. They grudgingly allowed us to continue living in this town where my family is from. However, every time something happened, they would call me and complain. While my parents made various compromises for us, I knew it was annoying, but I thought, well, it can't be helped, and put up with it. I understood that my mother appreciated having her daughter and son-in-law nearby, and I tried to be considerate to my in-laws, thinking of it as a way to show gratitude to both sets of parents, which helped me endure it. On the other hand, my in-laws made several aggravating remarks in the past. When our eldest daughter, Lily, was born, the first thing they said was, "Why didn't you give birth to a male hair? And on top of not living with us, you can't even have a boy. Why did Bob choose a wife like you?" They said all this before even offering congratulations. Bob responded, "People in the countryside have those values. Just let them say what they want." I was annoyed, but I decided to ignore their comments, understanding that we came from different backgrounds. A year later, when our son James was born, there were cheers of "well done," and now I can finally accept you as a part of the Smith family. I was surprised when they added, "Bring him over to show everyone." After all, to get to my in-laws' place, you'd need to take a plane and then a train, which at the very least takes 4 hours. There was no way I could take a newborn and a 1-year-old at far. Bob seemed to want to go and show off to his parents, perhaps because they praised him, but I said, "Aren't you worried about your own kids? It's nice if your parents want to see them, but there's no way I'm taking them. If you insist on going, I'll leave this house." After hearing that, he finally gave up. I even had to remind my in-laws of the consequences, asking them if they were okay if something happened to their hair, after which they begrudgingly gave in. But they were relentless in their phone calls to me. Still, I endured it all for the sake of protecting my children. In the end, my in-laws never did come up. The reason, of course, was the distance from their home. It's an hour's drive to the nearest train station, a 2-hour train ride with a few transfers to the closest airport station, and then another hour by plane. Just the travel time is 4 hours, but considering layovers, you'd probably need an additional 2 hours or so. In other words, it takes a good half day to travel. Even for the sake of their grandkids, for my in-laws who hardly ever leave their hometown, the distance felt like they were traveling to the other side of the world. It was a pity that we couldn't let them see their grandchild very often because of the distance. However, since they didn't come to visit either, we compromised on this matter and made an effort to send lots of photos and show our concern. The first time we took our kids to visit my husband's parents was after they started kindergarten. Figuring it was about time, Bob adjusted his work schedule and chose a time outside the peak holiday season to ensure a smoother trip. My in-laws seemed delighted, but it was primarily directed towards their grandson James. They almost completely ignored our daughter. This made me feel uncomfortable, and I wished we didn't have to visit again. Around that time, Bob's job became hectic, and it became harder to get time off. Since then, we haven't visited his parents once. I felt genuinely relieved. Since my own parents lived nearby, we visited them regularly. I did feel somewhat guilty about this, but given the way we were treated by my in-laws, I justified it in my mind. Bob seemed okay with it, and though I felt it was a bit irresponsible, we let it be. That was until the recent event when I learned about my mother's illness. Until she passed away, I tried to be with her as much as possible. Whenever she felt better, I would bring the kids to see her, ensuring we had no regrets. My in-laws had complaints about this. "You're always letting them see your mom," they remarked. But never us. I was stunned to hear these words. After all, the situations were entirely different. My mother had limited time left. She was soon going to be gone. Did they really understand this and still have the audacity to say such things? I broke down and spoke to Bob about it, but all he said was, "Maybe it's because I told them over the phone that the kids were visiting their grandma. Just try to bear with it." I felt disappointed in Bob. It had always been this way. Bob always left me to deal with issues related to his in-laws. He simply asked me to bear with them. He never defended me when they said anything against me, and it seemed like he didn't intend to. I, on the other hand, had never been told anything about my mother, so I always felt indebted to deal with his parents on my own. I realized at this moment that he was that kind of person. The trust and affection I had for Bob faded at this time. But if I had any spare time to be upset about this, I thought I should visit my mother, regardless of what his parents said. I stood my ground and didn't let them affect me up until the last day of my mother's life. There were many thoughts, but I couldn't keep crying. People can become strong for the ones they need to protect. I am now a mother myself. I can't just be my mother's daughter. Later, while sorting things out, I discovered something astonishing. My mother had a safe deposit box at the bank. Inside it, to my surprise, were gold bars. They were in a significant amount and seemed to have been purchased a long time ago. Apparently, she bought them with the insurance money from my father. There were also stocks. Converting all of it to the current value, that's like $3 million. It was beyond shocking, and in the safe, there was also a letter written by my mother. It said that with my father's insurance, there was no need to pay the house mortgage, and she was working. I wasn't a child who needed a lot of money. The money she saved was kept as gold and stocks for when it might be needed. She hoped it would be used wisely if something happened to her. Reading this, I felt my mother's emotions deeply and hugged the letter, crying. "What are you going to do with that $3 million? Bob finally broke the silence. What do you mean? What am I going to do? I was perplexed. For now, I plan to wait until the inheritance is settled. I'm the only heir, so I don't think there will be any problems. Yeah, I guess so, Bob said, seemingly lost in thought, looking up as if calculating something. I just thought I'd let you know, I said, leaving the room while he seemed distracted. Soon after, I completed the inheritance procedures, and the $3 million was transferred to my name. As soon as that happened, Bob suddenly declared, "We're moving in with my parents. If you oppose, we're getting a divorce." What are you talking about? Just what I said. I'll use that $3 million as I see fit. I've decided to build a two-family home with it, Bob explained casually. I was dumbfounded by Bob's casual response. What on earth do you mean? Don't you get it? I genuinely don't. I really don't get it. How did we suddenly end up on this topic? You lack not only self-awareness, but also empathy, Catherine. Bob sighed as he said that. What do you think about how you've treated my parents all these years? Treated them? I don't understand, honestly. I remember many things they did to me, but I hardly did anything to them. You always took care of your mother and ignored my parents, didn't you? You often took our kids to see your parents, but only took them to mine, once because they lived too far. Didn't I have a good reason for that? You never even invited my parents over. No, I asked them several times, but they always said they didn't want to travel from Nebraska because it's too far. Even for our wedding, despite many of Bob's colleagues attending, we had to hold ceremonies in both New York and Nebraska because they didn't want to travel far. Does he not remember that? Anyway, you've made my parents endure a lot. I think it's fair I use that money to take care of them. Now, is this who Bob really is? I always thought he was just a regular husband, a regular father. As I stood there stunned, Bob continued. I've always been unhappy with how you treated my parents, but there aren't jobs back in Nebraska, so I put up with it. Watching you pamper your parents, I've always wanted to do the same. But hey, I'm the bigger person here, so I kept quiet just to keep peace at home. What I kept silent, figuring I should hear him out completely since he is, after all, my husband. But now that we have this huge sum of money, things change. I don't need to hustle in this demanding job here. I'll quit and go back to Nebraska. We'll build a duplex, and I'll take care of my parents. When I mentioned my mother's inheritance, was he scheming this all along while looking into the sky? Little did I know he was making all these plans in his head. Bob, looking straight into my eyes, made this declaration: next month, we'll start construction. Once it's done, we're moving, so you better prepare. Meanwhile, I'll invite my parents over. Make sure you take care of them. If you can't, we're getting divorced. Remember this, Catherine. I'm the head of this household. I'm the boss here. If you can't follow what I say, we're getting divorced. I tried to gauge whether Bob was in his right mind by looking deep into his eyes. His eyes were bloodshot. He could be sane or insane. It's hard to tell. But one thing was clear. He was blinded by the $3 million. I could almost see the wads of cash in his pupils. No, I responded firmly. What'd you say? I won't live with your parents, Bob, and I won't move to Nebraska. I'm not uprooting our kids either, and at this point, I can't welcome your parents here. Then we'll get divorced, Bob, glaring at me, declared. Fine, let's divorce. But let me tell you one thing. You sure you won't regret this? Shut up, you worthless wife. Bob stormed out of the house and didn't return. 3 days later, out of the blue, Bob called. Hey, what's going on? What are you talking about? The golden stocks, the safe deposit box is empty. Ah, that. Well, I moved them elsewhere. It's not strange they aren't there. Why did you do that without telling me? It's my inheritance, Bob. I can do whatever I want with it, can't I? I told you I'd use it as I see fit. Everyone's entitled to their opinion, but I don't recall agreeing to that. Where did you hide it? I didn't hide it. I left it with my attorney. What did you say? I let out a sigh and then kindly explained. When it comes to inheritance, there's this thing called inheritance tax. Inherit something like $3 million. Who knows how much tax will be levied? So I left it with the attorney to sell only the necessary amount to pay the tax. Seems like a reasonable move, so I asked for that during the inheritance procedure, right? Go get it back now and give me the money from the sale. Why should I do that for you? A stranger to me now. What? Bob seemed confused by my words. We're married, aren't we? I sighed again, deciding to clarify kindly. You know you said you wanted a divorce, right? After that, I immediately contacted a divorce attorney, and the proceedings are already underway. Soon, you and I will be strangers. Why did you do something so rash? Weren't you the one who brought up the divorce? That was just a strategy to get you to agree on the inheritance. I was flabbergasted by the audacity to say such a thing so boldly. Anyway, I've already made payments to the lawyer, and if things continue this way, you and I will soon be strangers to each other. Even if we were still married, you would have no rights whatsoever. Hey, we're married. Don't be so cold. Bob's voice was almost tearful. So we'll soon no longer be husband and wife. By the way, I didn't realize until I heard it on this call, but you took the key to the safe deposit box without telling me, didn't you? Bob remained silent. It was an empty box, and I was thinking of canceling it anyway. But if you were trying to take its contents without my knowledge, that's theft. You're calling your husband a thief. You'll soon no longer be husband. But when you took the key, we were still married, right? I'll have to consult with a lawyer about what that means. Upon hearing this, Bob began to shout something incomprehensible over the phone. I can't understand what you're saying, so I'm going to hang up, I said, blocking his number. That night, I got a call from the in-laws. I'd blocked Bob's number, but forgot about theirs. This was their grievance. We've already started demolishing the house for reconstruction, and now you're telling us to stop. You think that's going to fly? We've already hired the contractor. He's told everyone about this big $3 million job he's got. Bring the money now. If you apologize, we'll still accept you as our daughter-in-law. To avoid amidst the chaos, I decided to patiently listen to their ranting. It seemed Bob had already returned to their home and begun reconstruction procedures while I was handling the inheritance. He probably thought if he presented it as a done deal, I'd just go along with it. From what I gathered, they had finished demolishing the old guest house, and the main house was now filled with the guest house's stuff. What are you going to do about it? Come right now and help clean up, they demanded. But I never asked for that, I replied. Have you finished saying what you wanted to? If so, I only have this one thing to say. My divorce with Bob is already finalized. Therefore, you and I are now strangers to each other. Goodbye. I then blocked their number too. I took my children and hid in a different location for safety. As expected, Bob and his parents came to our house and, finding us gone, reported us missing to the police. However, I had already discussed everything with my attorney, including our finalized divorce, the stolen safety deposit box key, and the recorded phone conversations. The lawyer clarified things with the police for me. Distraught, Bob and his parents approached my lawyer, begging him to hand over a letter to me. When the lawyer contacted me about it, I requested that it be forwarded to me. The letter read, "We've asked the contractor to hold off for a bit, and they've only dismantled the old annex so far, but they keep asking when they can resume. I completely forgot about the inheritance tax. Given the tax situation, I want to downsize the reconstruction with whatever budget remains after taxes. Now that you've lost your mother, the only grandparents our kids have are my parents. Please don't deprive them of their grandparents. You should make amends by being kind to my parents, living together. Familial affection will surely develop soon," and other such cringeworthy phrases. Moreover, do you mistakenly think that a woman has to wait 6 months to remarry? There's no such rule for couples. "Let's reconcile immediately," was written, making me roll my eyes even harder. Of course, I had my lawyer relay a firm no to all of Bob's requests, warned him to have no more interactions with me, and alerted him that any further stalking would be reported to the police. According to my lawyer, it seemed Bob had already started the procedures to quit his job. In his haste, he tried to reverse his decision, but his company was already in the middle of downsizing, so they didn't allow it. After receiving his severance, Bob reluctantly returned to his hometown with the money. He managed to appease the contractor, halting the reconstruction. However, I heard he completely lost his reputation back home and now lives in the old family house in cramped conditions. I decided to move far away to ensure Bob and his parents couldn't find me. My job is remote, so moving didn't cause any issues. It's a blessing in this modern age. I told my kids their dad was away for work, and surprisingly, they accepted it without much fuss. I thought Bob had a good relationship with them, but now it seems it wasn't that great after all. Come to think of it, it felt like Bob only interacted when he felt like it. It seemed like he wasn't truly listening to what I said, always asking for patience. Maybe he had the same kind of superficial relationship with our kids too. I'll keep the inheritance safe for the kids' future. It's a safety net for emergencies. Just like my mother raised me with steady guidance, I'll ensure my kids grow into grounded individuals.